Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Maes. I work in DG Regio, and that's in the unit on policy development and economic analysis, where I work as a policy analyst. And I work mainly on the collection and the analysis of regional data and indicators for climate and environment. So hence also my interest, I would say, in sustainable development goals, as these topics are very well covered by those goals. In last March, we published the 8th Cohesion Report, our unit, and the editor of this, Louis Dijkstra. The Cohesion Report, it assesses economic, social, and territorial cohesion in the EU, and I'm going to put a link in the chat with information, the full report, the summary for policymakers, and the associated communication, and also data sets that we have used in our assessments. The cohesion report essentially shows that less developed regions in Europe have been catching up. However, that many transition regions are stuck in a kind of development trap, which is of concern and which we will have to consider in future policies. It also concludes that cohesion policy has helped to reduce disparities among the EU's regions. That is a key policy objective of cohesion policy. And in cohesion countries, our funding equals to half of the total public investments in the last programming period, 2014-2020, which also, demonstrates the significant impact it can actually have. The next decades, EU growth will be driven by green and digital transitions to a large extent as outlined in the European Green Deal. This will bring new opportunities for Europe regions, but it will also require that some regions will undergo significant structural changes. And we are aware that this might create new regional disparities, differences in social, economic, and environmental growth and well-being of regions. We are particularly concerned about climate disparities that may arise from the asymmetrical impacts of climate change, but also of climate mitigation policies. Climate change, we know some areas, some regions in Europe will be hotter, will be drier, or will be wetter. And that has consequences for investments that these regions have to do to adapt against climate change. But we also are aware that mitigation policies, the transition to a carbon neutral Europe, will have a strong impact on regions. To this end, also Regio has a financial instrument called Just Transition Fund, which will actually help regions that face high costs, that are related to the transition of a climate neutral Europe. And there is a proposal for the Commission also for a social climate fund, which will also help households actually doing the same. A conclusion of the cohesion report was that also strengthening the cross-border and the interregional cooperation and collaboration is one of the solutions to address regional disparities or big gaps and differences between regions. And I think that was especially demonstrated by the pandemic. It highlighted all the difficulties that we have to cross national borders to go to work, for education, for healthcare, for other services. And it demonstrated well that road and rail transport, for instance, the performance of it is quite lower in border regions. Addressing these issues, these differences and difficulties that border regions face requires better governance, functional border areas, stronger coordination of services, infrastructure and investments. And this is, of course, the key objective of Interreg. The program is now worth 10 billion euro for the current programming period to 2027. A first batch of Interreg programs was adopted by the Commission in March this year. So there is now an ongoing call for projects. As also clearly explained in the invitation to this meeting, Interreg contributes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the monitoring of these Sustainable Development Goals constitutes a very rich and a valuable source of data that can help us, certainly we in our unit, to help us assess regional disparities and cohesion. And this requires better spatial data. This is something on which we have stressed many years. Eurostat publishes, for instance, annually a report on progress to the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's at EU level and at member state level. Our ambition is always to have more and better indicators to monitor sustainable development goals, but that can be quantified and assessed at regional level, or that can be disaggregated for other territorial typologies, such as the degree of urbanization, so that we understand better how sustainable development is reached on the urban-rural gradient. There's no better goal than SDG 11 on sustainable urbanization, where better spatial data are needed for monitoring. And it is again our unit, and in particular Lois Dijkstra, the head of the analysis sector, in the lead to develop at global and European level specific typologies on urbanization, how we can best measure sustainable urban development. We are quite keen on having better high resolution layers from Earth observation, for instance, to monitor trends of the various SDG indicators. But we are also more than interested, I would say, in all the other applications of regional SDGs and monitoring the different tools so that we can use them actually to also measure territorial cohesion. And in particular, the Interreg projects offer an excellent opportunity not only to achieve sustainable development goals, but also develop the regional or the spatially explicit territorial data that we need for monitoring. So from that point of view, we are certainly interested to keep informed about this work on SDGs in the context of Interreg. And I look forward to have a fruitful meeting and a discussion with you. Thank you for your attention.